Time to put your galleons where your mouth is, by Tsume Yuki. Chapter 17. A ringing noise that echoed. It was the last Hogsmeade visit before the Christmas holidays. Stuffing his hands deeper into his coat pockets, Sirius Black took a deep sigh before exhaling, not quite sure how he was feeling, other than lethargic. He knew he should try with his schoolwork, but really, what was the point? Turais had only gotten his owls, and while they were spectacular owls indeed, he was still out there making a difference. And yeah, he was only a 4th year, but that didn't mean he couldn't do anything. Did it? Burying his face deeper into the red and gold of his scarf, Sirius looked at Regulus from the corner of his eye. The two Black brothers had agreed to do their Christmas shopping together. Not out of a real need to spend time together, seeing as that's what they did most mealtimes now. Nor was it to do with the fact hordes of insensitive students had been asking them when Turais planned to duel the Dark Lord since the newspaper yesterday. Even if that was a big annoyance. No, it was out of necessity. The reason they'd come to Hogsmeade together was because it was impossible to get Turais a Christmas present. Or rather, because they had no idea what to get him. What could someone get for Turais? The boy had enough money to buy whatever he wanted, and the magic to make what could not be bought. He and Regulus faced this dilemma every year, and as they became more intelligent, as they grew, so did the fact that they really had no idea what to get Turais. Last year, they had settled on a rare spellcrafter's book, which Turais had read cover to cover after giving Sirius a small journal filled with pranking spells that Turais had searched out or created himself, and then a charmed snitch for Regulus that would increase its level of difficulty the more skilled he became. Both gifts were far better than anything that could have been gotten on the market, and Sirius was determined to get something for Turais this time that the boy would love. He just needed to figure out what that would be. They'd spent an hour in the bookstore verbally sparring on whether Turais would want another book or a scarf that they could enchant when the screaming started. Sirius looked up, blinking in surprise as people began fleeing past the window, and then a figure in dark robes was there, firing spells, including a red one that struck down the lovely Miss Lucy Manners, a half-blood Ravenclaw a year younger than Sirius, that had her screaming. Sirius had clocked her when they first came back to school for the new year because suddenly girls were interesting and Lucy Manners was a very pretty one. "We've got to help," Sirius growled. He didn't think about Turais at that moment, that it was what Turais would have done, leaping right into action to help someone in need. But Sirius would look back on that moment and be proud of himself, that he too had the guts to do what was right, knew it was the right thing to do. "Reggie, get Lucy to Honeydukes in the cell. There's a passage back to school." His brother nodded, looking exceedingly cagey, but nevertheless following after his orders. Sirius hit the Death Eater with the strongest blasting spell he knew, wand clenched tightly in hand. Turais had not taught them how to deal over their multitude of summer holidays. He taught them how to fight and how to walk away from one with all their limbs attached. And while it was a bloody odd spell, being able to change someone's arms into flippers meant they couldn't use a wand and thus incapacitated the enemy. Turais had always taught them to not just disarm the enemy, like their many defense teachers said so, but to make sure they couldn't rearm themselves. Kinda hard to do without arms. Sirius let his eyes scan the mayhem around them, registering that Regulus was all but carrying Lucy away towards Honeydukes, and that was when he caught a glimpse of the source of all this panic. He was tall, with skin so pale, it looked as if no blood actually ran beneath it, and that it had all been stored in the two gleaming eyes, red and vicious. Sirius faltered, feeling horror seep into his bones. Where were the professors? While the older students might stand a chance against the lowly Death Eaters, there was no way that they could stand against Voldemort, not even if they all ganged up on him at once. This was going to be a slaughter! But before the figure in the long black robe could put one bare foot forwards, something else happened. There was the sound of something metal hitting the cobbled floor of Hogsmeade's main street, something which skidded to a stop before Voldemort and shimmered in the winter sun. And the Dark Lord stopped moving, just staring down at the small necklace that had been presented at his feet by an unknown source. Surprise had flashed across his features before it was consumed by a rage so potent that it seemed to silence the very air around them. all activity stopped, the Death Eaters falling to their knees and clutching at their left forearms as if it physically pained them. Sirius wasn't sure, but maybe the Dark Mark could actually do that? But why was Voldemort upset over a pretty little necklace? As if on cue, there was a flash of gold, followed by a ringing noise that echoed around the village as the little cup skidded across the stones to come to rest next to the last projectile. Only this time, everyone had gotten a chance to see where it had come from. Sirius had never seen anyone angrier than what Voldemort currently was, and he was terrified for whoever had thrown those items at the man. But it wasn't until his eyes landed upon the source. A figure stood casually upon the roof of the framed broomsticks, that he felt the tight grasp of cold fear upon his spine. Turais looked different. No longer the picture-perfect pure-blood heir he'd once been. Now he looked like a warrior, dressed in what Sirius recognized as basilisk skin, no doubt from a shed skin that Asaira had probably donated to him. His hair was free from his usual bonds, falling around his face, and his eyes were the bright green they always flashed whenever he was building up an unusual amount of magic. It had been in the papers, but Sirius had never expected to get to witness the duel between his brother and Voldemort. He wasn't certain he wanted to. The idea of Turais losing, but he wasn't going to lose anyway, made him feel sick and near hysterical. There was a cloak of some kind wrapped around his brother's shoulders, and it took Sirius a second to realize what it was. An invisibility cloak. And was that a tiara in his hands? You can have the diadem back if you want, but I'm keeping the ring. I've grown fond of it, I'm afraid. I'm about to get over it! There was a flash of brilliant green, the color of Turais' eyes, and his brother was laughing, sliding down the roof as the deadly spell missed him by near inches, rocketing up into the sky. Turais landed neatly in the now empty courtyard, facing down the worst Dark Lord in history with... Sirius's thoughts skidded to a halt. He knew that wand. And it wasn't Turais'. It was the same one from out of Turais' mural that he'd made back when they were kids. It looked remarkably like... Sirius looked at the cloak on Turais' shoulder again. Then the ring that was most certainly not his heir ring, before finally his eyes came back to the wand. It looked like the Elder Wand. Turais Black, Voldemort sneered. He'd picked up the trinkets that Turais had thrown at him with a look of someone who had just witnessed the murder of their firstborn child and was planning revenge. Do you think this will help you? Well, I'd offer the diary as well, but that kind of went up in flames. Turais barely managed to finish his sentence before he had to block a volley of curses. It was astounding, the speed at which the two of the cast and students and shopkeepers alike were leaping out of range as fast as they could. Sirius had taken shelter behind a blown-out shop window, knocking robes out of the way in the process, but he could still see what was happening. He'd known Turais was magically powerful, that he was the best and brightest student to come out of Hogwarts, but he'd never seen him use all that power before. It was a clash of epic proportions. Giant flaming snakes brought low by dragons made of water. Brilliant flashes of spellfire lighting up the little street. The Aurors had arrived now, but they too had taken cover, watching on in awe as his brother stood his ground and faced down the man who'd been terrorizing the nation. Sirius wasn't stupid. He knew to go out there now would only get himself and probably Turais killed at the same time. The Black Heir needed to focus, and Sirius wasn't about to distract him. Briefly, he wondered where the school teachers were, gritting his teeth. Safest place in magical Britain, yeah, right. Twin grunts brought him back to attention, for it seemed Voldemort and Turais had both hit one another at the same time, a cut each. Turais had his free hand pressed against his neck, stemming the blood flow of what Voldemort had probably hoped would be a kill shot, but Turais had no doubt only just avoided, whilst Voldemort was nursing his left arm, where it seemed the upper part of the limb had been broken. Turais Black, the Otter Umbra. We could conquer all of Britain together. No thanks. I'm good with my little patch of family. Not that you'd understand what that is, Tom Marvolo Riddle, or Lord Voldemort, whatever name you want. But I've got another one. It's the Master of Death. He'd been right! How had Turais managed to collect all the Hallows? When had he done it? That thought was cut off as a spell hit Voldemort, and the man gave the most unearthly scream. Turais watching dispassionately from the sidelines. The Dark Lord dropped to the floor. The only sign he was even alive was the obviously labored breathing. Sirius hadn't heard a word of what spell Turais had just performed, nor had he recognized it. But from the fact his older brother had sheathed his wand, the Elder Wand, and pocketed the cloak and the stone, he wasn't going to be getting up anytime soon. Sirius didn't think. He just ran forward, slamming into Turais' form and coiling his arms around the older boy's neck, who had caught his flying hug effortlessly. "I'm sorry," Sirius whispered, burying his face into the crook of Turais' neck and shuddering slightly as Turais rubbed his back with one hand, the other catching the second person to slam into him. Regulus, no doubt. "I know. I am too." It took Sirius a few seconds to realize that the wetness smearing his face wasn't just Turais' blood, but his own tears, too. "Black! Thank Merlin! What did you do to him?" The aura that had come over seemed torn between excitement, awe, and horror, and Sirius pulled himself out of Turais' neck to look across at the slumbering body of the Dark Lord. He felt the rumble of Turais' voice as he spoke, but the words barely registered in his brain, so unbelievable they seemed. "I took his magic away."